Alright, so we are going to start chapter 1, History 2059 over 1, IGCSE O level. This chapter is about the study of three religious reformers, Shah Waliullah, Sayyid Ahmad Brelvi and Haji Shariatullah. We would one by one study each of these three personalities. I have been recommending to the students, and in this lecture I would strongly recommend that whenever you study any of these three personalities, you have to mainly focus on their work or contributions. For example, when you study Shah Waliullah, you have to largely focus on his work or contributions. When you study Sayyid Ahmad Brelvi, you have to focus largely on his work. And finally, when you in this chapter study about Haji Shariatullah, you have to focus largely on his work, because 14 marks question generally asks information about the work of each of these three personalities. So you have to mainly focus on these aspects. So now, before we come into the contribution and work of Shah Waliullah, I would briefly look at the circumstances that led Shah Waliullah to start thinking about the fate of the Indian Muslims. And obviously this is very important. This would cover his beliefs, and later on we would connect his beliefs to his contribution. One of the tips that I can share with you is that you can, whenever you study any of these personality, you can look at the timeline of or the age in which a certain personality lived. For example, Shah Waliullah was born in the year 1703 and he died in 1762. You can look at the major events that occurred between 1703 and 1762, and then you can relate the relevant events to the contributions, or you can relate the role of Shah Waliullah in those major events, and this is how it would become quite easier for you largely to keep in memory and the contributions or work of Shah Waliullah. So we can now come to the circumstances. For example, you have 7 marks question. The question starts that why did Shah Waliullah revive Islam in India? So we are going to discuss the answer to this question also. Now, he was born in the early 18th century. This is the time when the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb Alamgir died. He died in 1707. I mean, the early 18th century is the time when the Mughal Empire started declining. And with the death of Aurangzeb Alamgir, the Mughal Emperor, what happened? His sons, they started making wars against each other. Why? Because they started competing for the position of the Mughal Emperor. Every son wanted to be the Mughal king, and this is how they would start. They would basically start making wars against each other, and every son more or less held control over the army of a province. And what they would do, they would mobilize the army of one province against the army of the other, and this is how they would make these wars against each other. These wars are known as War of Succession or succession disputes. What happened that these wars would consume the military resources of the Mughal army, and obviously you need huge resources to make wars against each other, and this indicates that the Mughal treasury was also depleting, and this is how the Mughal economy came under tension. So and apart from that, when the central Mughal government started becoming weak, the regional forces, for example, the Marathas in the south and the Sikhs in the north, they started becoming more powerful than ever before, and they started posing serious challenges to the Mughal central power, through the Mughal Empire. And there were also other powers, regional forces, for example, Jats and Rajput. They were also posing challenge to the Mughal Empire. And obviously the central administration of the central government of the Mughal became weak or ineffective, and the central government had had lost or had a weak control over administration control over the regions, and this is how we can all this showed that the Mughal were facing internal challenges, and apart from that they were also facing external challenges. For example, in the year 1739, Persian invader Nadir Shah came over to India, looted and plundered Delhi. He looted and plundered the royal palace of the Mughals, and he came back from India. And then Ahmad Shah Abdali also intervened in India. Above all, the influence of the Europeans was growing in India. Particularly the influence of the English East India Company was growing rapidly. In the year 1757, the English East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Dawla, and under the command of Robert Clive, the English East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal and took control of Bengal. This showed that the military strength of the Mughals had started weakening. All this worried Shah Waliullah, and what he did, he was very concerned about the declining power of the Muslims. So he was, as you can see, Shah Waliullah was born in the year 1703, and his real name was Qutbuddin. Qutbuddin means the pivot of Deen, and he received the title Waliullah. Waliullah means friend of God, friend of Allah, and since he was very pious and righteous person, so he received this. He was also known as Shah Waliullah. His father name was Shah Abdul Rahim, who was running a Madrasa Rahimia in Delhi, and he was one of the accomplished religious scholars of the time. And Alamgir Aurangzeb wanted his assistance in the collection of Fatawa Alamgiri, but he did not like this idea because he was not comfortable with the life in the Mughal court. So he started focusing on his Madrasa Rahimia. Under the loving care of his father, Shah Waliullah received his education, and he was very pious and righteous person. In the year 1718, his father Shah Abdul Rahim died, and with his death, Shah Waliullah became director of Madrasa Rahimia, and he started teaching there. 12 years he taught there, and he was basically he at that time, in the year 1724, he traveled to Arabia for Hajj and Umrah and for higher education. While in Arabia, his teacher name was Sheikh Abu Tahir bin Ibrahim, and while in his stay in Arabia, Sheikh Abu Tahir bin Ibrahim was also one of the accomplished and renowned religious scholar of the time in Arabia, and he was Shah Waliullah received his education in Arabia under his guidance and care. While in Arabia, Shah Waliullah was very concerned about the deteriorating conditions of the Muslims on a global scale, and particularly he was very concerned about the fate of the Indian Muslims, because Indian Muslims were losing as a political force losing their political power in India. So Shah Waliullah, he came back to India in the year 1732, and he started when he came to India, he identified the causes of the decline of the Indian Muslim, the Mughal Empire, and he identified that now we are going to discuss his beliefs. He identified that the Indian Muslim had moved away from Islamic principles and teachings. That was why they were facing decline. Secondly, the knowledge that the Indian Muslim possessed was insufficient, and the knowledge that they had was not updated. And so what he wanted to do, he wanted the Indian Muslim to find solution to their problems through teachings of the Quran and Sunnah. And for that, he started working for the uplift of the Indian Muslims. So what he did within 5 years of his return from Arabia, he translated the Quran into Persian language. Why Persian? Because Persian was the lingua franca of the time. That means that the Persian was widely spoken and understood by the Indian Muslim at that time. And through this translation, he wanted the Indian Muslim to gain access to the Quranic knowledge and teaching. He also faced criticism from the orthodox religious scholars of the time. They blamed that Shah Waliullah through his translation was trying to bring about new things into Deen. He was committing bid'ah. He committed bid'ah. So he also faced criticism, but he continued working, and he also wrote 51 books, and out of 51 he wrote 26 books in Urdu. He wrote out of 51 books he wrote 26 in Persian language and 25 in Arabic language, because through these books he wanted to not only create awareness among the Indian Muslim, but he also wanted to create unity, and he wanted to offer the Indian Muslim the updated interpretations of the Quran, and he was trying to offer them an updated interpretation of the Islam in the light of the age in which the Indian Muslims were living. And obviously one of the a few famous books were, for example, Hujjatullah al-Baligha, and then he also wrote Izalat al-Khiffa. Through these books he tried to create not only awareness but also unity. He knew that the Indian Muslims were divided into various groups or sects. So what he did, he wrote a book, Qurat al-Alan. In this book he identified 3 common grounds, for example, God, the Messenger, peace be upon him, and the book. So these were the common grounds according to him that existed among all the groups of the Muslims. So through these common grounds he wanted to create unity, so that the Muslims would stand united, and united they would be able to face the challenges of the time. And then he also put emphasis on ijtihad, because he did not want the Indian Muslim to rely on blind following. He did not want the Indian Muslim he did not want the practice of blind following, basically. So what he did, ijtihad is like a process in which the Muslims find the solution to their problems on the basis of reasons, through consensus in the light of the Islamic teachings. So he encouraged the Indian Muslim to find the solution to their problems in the light of the Quranic teachings, through reasoning and all this. And this is how he tried to discourage them to depend on blind following. Then he also put emphasis on jihad, because as we have just discussed that the Indian Muslim were facing threats from the regional forces. So he wanted the Indian Muslim to wage jihad against their enemies. William Dalrymple has written in his book that Shah Waliullah wanted the Indian Muslim to avoid the non-Muslim practices. For example, he did not like the Indian Muslim to participate in the cultural and religious activities of Hindus and other communities or other communities of other religions. So for example, he did not want the idea of the Indian Muslim going into Hindu holy places, their participation in their cultural and festivals and so on. So this is how he tried to basically purify the Indian Islam from non-Muslim practices, so that the Indian Muslim could maintain their unique identity, and this is how they could get united. And then there is a historian, Barbara Metcalf. She is the historian of religious scholars of South Asia, and she has written in her book that Shah Waliullah tried to convince the local rulers and the rulers abroad that they should come and play their role to revive Islam. For example, according to her, Shah Waliullah wrote letters to local rulers. For example, he wrote letter to Nizam al-Mulk, who was the founder of the state of Hyderabad, and he also wrote letters to the ruler of to Najib al-Dawla, the ruler of Rolkhand, and he tried to convince them that they should avoid exploitation of the lower classes. They should not impose, for example, heavy taxation on the peasants. They should avoid exploitation of the merchants, the peasants, and the workers, and so on. And above all, she had also highlighted that Shah Waliullah wanted them to cut down the size of the land that the big landlords were possessing at that time, and he wanted them to take control of the maximum portion of the land. This is how Shah Waliullah tried to weaken the feudalism in the Indian society, and he tried to bring about social justice in India. Now, above all, he also wrote a letter to Ahmad Shah Abdali and tried to convince him to play his role to rescue the Indian Muslims from the threat of the Marathas. And partly in response to his letter, Ahmad Shah Abdali came over to India, and he defeated the Marathas in the third battle of Panipat, and the Indian Muslims were able to defeat the Marathas. But the Mughals could not take full advantage of the defeat or absence of the Marathas, and also Ahmad Shah Abdali also tried to bring about stability within the Mughal Empire, but he could not succeed in this venture, and he returned. Now, these were the major contributions. For example, he was I can just one by one repeat. For example, we can start from one. Number one, Shah Waliullah was a role model. He basically tried to act upon the Islamic teachings and principles so that the Indian Muslim could walk in his path and follow him. And then he translated the Quran into Persian language. What you can do, that I have written basically about nine set of contribution that Shah Waliullah made to the spread of Islam in India. And what you can do is you can highlight the importance of his contributions by repeating each of these contributions and relating it to his to the point of importance. Now, he translated the Quran. He translated the Quran into Persian language, and obviously later on his two sons, such Shah Abdul Qadir and Shah Rafiuddin, they translated the Quran into Urdu language 70 years after Shah Waliullah. Now, basically Shah Waliullah had four sons: Shah Abdul Ghani, Shah Abdul Aziz, Shah Abdul Qadir, and Shah Rafiuddin. So these, out of all these sons, were the accomplished scholars of their time, and they carried forward the work and contributions and ideas of Shah Waliullah. Now, basically, according to S.M. Ikram has written in his book that in the 18th century, Indian Muslims were losing political power, but Shah Waliullah kept the Indian Muslim, the religious power of the Indian Muslims alive. So it was because of the contributions largely of Shah Waliullah that although the Indian Muslims were losing their political force, they did not lose their religious force in the 18th century. This is one of the very, very important point that showed the importance of his contributions. Now, basically, later on we see that he was the first personality who identified the problems of causes of the Indian decline of the Indian Muslim by highlighting that it was due to the neglect of the Indian Muslim, that they had basically they showed they were not they stopped basically the following the teachings of Islam that led to their decline. He was basically the one of the most important most important point that you can write as far as importance of his contribution is concerned, that Shah Waliullah became the source of inspiration for the later generations to revive Islam and to contribute and spread Islam in India. Now in the 14 marks question, what you can do is, for example, you have 14 marks question, to what extent Shah Waliullah contribute to the spread of Islam in India, explain your answer. So in this, obviously this is 14 marks question, and in order to attempt a 14 marks question you have to give the contributions, not first you would highlight the contributions of Shah Waliullah. You will basically write 6 paragraphs, you will also cover the contributions of Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi, Haji Shariatullah, and in the end the 6th paragraph would cover your judgment. You will write a paragraph, a judgment paragraph. In that judgment paragraph, what you can do is you can give importance to the contributions of Shah Waliullah more than any other more than the contributions of any other personalities, because it was the contributions of Shah Waliullah and his teaching and his Madrasa Rahimiyya that all the other reformers and religious scholars got inspiration from. For example, Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi was one of the students at Madrasa Rahimiyya, and he was very inspired by the teachings of Shah Waliullah, and he was the disciple of his son, Shah Waliullah's son. So he basically started jihad movement against the Sikhs, and he tried to promote and keep the Indian Islam alive.